We have a very exciting panel and topic for our November Faith Forum, and the topic is forbidden foods. And what does it really mean to be kosher? What does it really mean to follow a kosher diet? Why are some faiths vegetarian? Why don't some eat root vegetables? Are there scriptural references to support these eating choices? What about fasting? How is eating to excess viewed? How can food be more equitably shared on planet Earth? So this morning, these are the topics and the ideas and the things that I have asked our panelists to share with us. And we're so blessed to have 6 amazing panelists. One of our panelists will be arriving shortly, in about 15 minutes. And we're just really, really excited to hear about this topic, particularly as it's right before our feasting day, right before Thanksgiving. So before we open up, I would just like to take like 30 seconds to have, or a moment, to just have a moment of silence for honoring and supporting and sending love to victims of violence anywhere in our world. And in that time, maybe in our own faith traditions, we can just send peace to our world. May peace prevail on our beautiful planet. So before we start, I'd like to invite the Executive Director of the Arizona Historical Society to just share for a moment about this beautiful venue that we're in, and also invite you to check out any of the exhibits that are on.
So anyway, I'm Lawrence Bell, I'm Executive Director here. How many of you have been here before to one of the forums? So you already know the story, but I'll give you the 5-second speech. This is the very first synagogue that was built in Phoenix. It was built in 1921. It's actually a historic building in Phoenix. It also later became its first Chinese-speaking Christian church. It's called First Chinese Baptist Church, and then a Spanish-speaking Baptist church. So it really is the perfect place to have an interfaith forum, given that it's had 3 different cultures and 2 different religions that have been practiced here in the same space. And furthermore, on display now, we actually have an exhibit that very much ironically relates to the building, in that we have an exhibit on display about Jews in China who fled to China during the Second World War, during the Holocaust, to the city of Shanghai. Story, I won't go into it, but you're more than welcome to browse the exhibit after the forum. And welcome, and also you can take information about the Arizona Jewish Historical Society as you go. And we'd love to have you in programs. All of our programs, and people of any faith are welcome to attend.
Thank you so much, Larry. My name's Mitzi, Lynton. I don't know if I introduced myself. I'm the Vice President of the Executive Board of the Arizona Interfaith Movement. And it's my great honor to introduce each of our panelists today right before they speak, because I can never remember. If I hear everyone's introduction, I'm like, who was that, right? So our first speaker who's agreed to go first is the lovely Anita Rangaswami. I love her name because whenever Dr. Paul from the Arizona Interfaith would say, how do you pronounce your name? She said, just like it sounds, Anita Rangaswami. So it always helps me to remember your beautiful name, and it's such a lovely, lovely name. And you are so beloved of us on the Arizona Interfaith Movement. And I'm just getting to you. You are a Hindu and serve on the board of Arizona Interfaith Movement. And Anita has lived in the Valley for over 30 years. And she is an active member of the East Indian community. She has degrees in engineering and a Master of Business Administration, and has had a successful corporate career for over 20 years. Anita has practiced Bhakti Yoga for over 30 years and is a member of the International International Yoga Therapists Association, and a Yoga Alliance instructor. Anita does wellness workshops in the Valley and works with individuals who heal body, mind, and spirit by integrating Ayurveda yoga, meditation, and healing techniques. Anita is also a board member of the Arizona Forward organization. Let me say that again. The Arizona Forward organization, which brings business and civic leaders together to improve the environmental, sustainability, and economic vitality in Arizona. And in her spare time, Anita enjoys badminton. I didn't know there was any badminton in Phoenix. And outdoor activities with her husband and 3 sons. So please help me welcome Anita Rangaswami. Larry will give us the time at 7 minutes, and then you'll have 1 minute to conclude.
Thank you, Mitzi, for that wonderful introduction. Om Shri Krishnaya. Om Guru Pyo Namaha. So it gives me great pleasure to be here this morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning and talk about forbidden foods from the Hindu culture. But before I delve into that, I think I want to explain some things about the whole concept of food and how it's viewed in the Hindu culture. So food is considered to be the primary source of energy, whether it's physical, mental, or spiritual energy. And so food is always given the respect that it deserves, and prayers are offered before we partake in any kind of food, and that is very common in most cultures. So just like you say grace, or other communities might use the name of their Lord, we do that as well before we partake in any food, because that is the energy that's going into the mind-body system as we take in food. And so it's very important about how you eat food, what kind of food you eat, when you eat it, what is your mental condition when you eat it. All of these things become so important when you're partaking in food. And a lot of the scriptures, including the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the most referenced and most known scripture of the Hindus, would reference. And so when you think about the Bhagavad Gita, that is known as the Song of the Lord. Has anybody heard of that? Okay, good. So that is called the Song of the Lord, and I see someone pointing out, and that is the book. Well, there's many different versions of it as well, and sizes of the book, depending on the content. But essentially, this content is though it's very connected with the life of the Lord Krishna, the scriptures talk in general about yoga as well, and different types of yoga. And so as part of that, the Bhagavad Gita is truly not just meant for the Hindu culture. It has more of a flavor of universal principles that are put out there. And so that's meant for every person from every creed or every nation. So the food guidance from scriptures, and I just want to touch upon this so that there is some background and history to this. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there are verses, specific verses on diet and moderation in food. There's chapter 6, verse 16. It states that a yogi must neither eat not too much or too little, neither sleep too much or too little. And the individual must understand and regulate one's established habits about eating, sleeping, and recreation. This is coming from the Bhagavad Gita. There are other scriptures like the Manusmriti or the Dharma Sutras, and these tell us that when food is being eaten, one must be seated. So these days we're eating in the car, we're eating all over the place, and we're walking, talking, etc. So some of the Rig Vedic scriptures talk about the fact that food should be eaten only twice a day. Again, we have other concepts these days of eating smaller meals multiple times a day, and sometimes we're chewing gum all the time, which is again going into the digestive system and stimulating the digestive system all through the day. So some of these things, there were timings for food to be provided, and Ayurveda is a whole medical science that has also originated from India, where there are descriptions of how to eat, when to eat, what types of foods to eat, what are the tastes that are important in the foods, etc. So the other one that I wanted to share with you was the Manusmriti, where the Manusmriti says that we should greet our food, honor it, rejoice upon seeing it, and pray that we may always obtain it. And one other book is the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is related to yoga. And this states that cravings should not drive one's eating habits. Rather, the best diet is one that is tasty, nutritious, and likable, as well as sufficient to meet the needs of one's body and for one's inner self. So now we're getting into the spiritual aspects of the food as well, and the energies that food brings into the body and the mind. So when we think of Ayurveda, there are 6 different tastes that Ayurveda, which is an ancient medical science originating from India, it talks about 6 tastes. And what are those 6 tastes? Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. And we find all these tastes in everything, all the foods that we eat. For instance, the taste of an onion, it's pungent, it smells pungent, and it's sort of, it tastes like that as well. Or maybe there are bitter tastes, like the bitter gourd, or spinach. These are considered to be bitter foods. And then we know the sweet foods, which everybody loves, of course. So there's a balance to be drawn between all these different foods. And that's what Hinduism, and that's what Sanatana Dharma, which is really the word that we should be using, because that's what is the origin of Hinduism. So again, there are prayers to be said, and if I have the time, we can say one of those prayers at the end. I don't want to run short of where we need to be going with this presentation. So in terms of the foods then, there are classifications of the foods. There's Rajasic, Sattvic, and Tamasic foods. These are Sanskrit names. What they really refer to are the Tamasic foods are the kinds of foods that make you sluggish or just very tired. So sometimes you've all experienced this. When you eat certain kinds of foods, they just make you want to sit. They just make you feel lazy. You know, those are called the Tamasic foods, which means that when you eat them, it takes a longer while to digest them perhaps, and each person's body is different again. So the way you digest them would differ from one person to the other. So everybody here would not be digesting food in the same way. So again, this is the scriptures talked about having, bringing about dullness, etc. Then there's the Rajasic foods, where the Rajasic foods are those that they start to stimulate the mind. They get you passionate and aggressive sometimes if they're not taken in moderation. And then come the Sattvic foods, which are very spiritually oriented, and people feel like they give you clarity of mind. So given this background now, we come to the forbidden foods. So given all of this in mind, you want to keep these in mind as you think of why certain foods may be forbidden. So in Hinduism, meats are generally considered to be forbidden. However, that's not to say that Indians do not eat meat. So Indians do eat meat, and again, they do. I see some heads shaking in some indicating a no, but Indians do eat meat. However, the scriptures encourage not eating meat just for all of these other reasons, and to bring you into that sattvic mode, or the mode of being more spiritually inclined. So the more spiritually inclined you are, people will avoid meat, they avoid onions, some people they avoid garlic. These are considered to be those foods that are driving the passion, the anger sometimes. And so those kinds of foods would be avoided in Hinduism. And of course, beef, as most people know, I think by now, beef is one of the foods that is definitely on the taboo list, and that is certainly avoided by all Indians. I would like to say that, at least. But these days, of course, in the 21st century, things are always different. But that would be a food that is definitely to be avoided. And alcohol was another thing that would be avoided. Mushrooms are considered to be not so sattvic, meaning that they do not have the energies that are probably required for spiritual practice. So devout Hindus will avoid these different types of foods. Now the purpose of avoiding beef though, as people think that it's more religious, yes, there is a religious component to it because the cow is revered and as considered to be sacred, but there's also the other parts of it because all parts of the cow are so useful to humanity. From the milk that it provides, the cheese, the curd, the butter, the ghee, which is clarified butter that you get from it. The leather of the cow is used for making shoes, etc. So there's every part of the cow that is useful. So there's also that scientific principle that can be applied to the religious reasons of why beef should be avoided. And on that note, I will stop with that list of taboo foods and forbidden foods because I know all of our other panelists have a lot to say about their religions as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Anita, and I'm sure that people will have questions for you at the end. So our next panelist to share will be Rabbi Lavinsky, who has now finished his lunch, so he is free to share. And we're so happy also to welcome Pastor Gary, and we'll introduce him later, who has now arrived as well. Rabbi Lavinsky, we're just so thrilled to have you back with us again. We just really enjoyed you being a panelist with us before, and when I contacted Larry Bell for suggestions for a rabbi to come and speak with us, your name just rolled off of his lips immediately, so we were delighted when you agreed. Rabbi Lavinsky has been the spiritual leader of Bethel congregation in Phoenix since 2003. A graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary, he has earned a reputation as an inspiring preacher and teacher, and has been active in the Jewish community of Phoenix and beyond. He is a past president of the Board of Rabbis of Greater Phoenix, has served as a regional president and executive board of the Rabbinical Assembly Conservative, and currently serves on the board of Duet, Partners in Health and Aging, and Merkaz USA, the Zionist arm of the conservative movement. Rabbi Lavinsky is also a retired U.S. Navy Reserve chaplain and reached the rank of lieutenant commander. Please help me welcome Rabbi Lavinsky.
Thank you so much. Where do I begin? I should begin in Genesis, right? You know the story of Adam and Eve. I recently heard that had Adam and Eve been Chinese, we'd still be in the Garden of Eden. Why? Because they would have left the apple alone, and they would have eaten the snake. And talking about taboos, obviously, most people in the Western world don't eat snakes. Unless maybe you're a cowboy, I don't know. But the truth is that many different faiths, as I'm sure you will learn today, have different taboos, have different traditions. And as a rabbi, you might ask, Rabbi, why don't you mix meat and milk? Why don't you eat shrimp? Why don't you eat pork? And I will tell you honestly, I have no idea. And I say that in all honesty because the kosher laws, kashrut as we call them, fall into the category of Jewish law that we would call in Hebrew chukim, which are laws that do not have a rational explanation. It's good enough that God tells us, do not eat this. And sometimes that's part of what discipline is. How many of you are parents? And have kids ever asked you, why can't I go out and play in the lightning? And most of us have at one point or another gone to that great answer, because I'm your mother or I'm your father, and I told you so. And if that applies to fathers and mothers, how much more does that apply to God, who can demand of us certain restrictions and things that we can eat and can't eat, who we can sleep with, who we can't sleep with, all these other things. It has a great deal to do with discipline that we need to learn. Now, even though I do not have the definitive explanation as to why I keep kosher and why many other Jews keep kosher, it doesn't stop us from hypothesizing and theorizing about these things. So there are some wonderful, wonderful explanations. So for example, we don't eat pork. Well, why not? What is the criterion? Well, I'll start off with fish. What are the criteria for Jews who eat fish? What do those fish have to be? Scales and fins. Okay? So, halibut's okay, salmon's okay, especially smoked. And of course, some other fish are fine, but shrimp are no good, mussels, eel, it's not what we eat. But with animals, land animals, what's the requirement? You're a shill. You're Jewish. I'm looking for somebody else. Anybody read the Bible here? What are the two requirements? Cloven hooves. Chew the cud, or they're ruminants. Okay? Now, what's so unkosher about a pig? And kosher means fit, not blessed by a rabbi, fit or proper. What's so unkosher about a pig? It gives the outward impression that it's kosher, because it's got split hooves. But when you open up inside, it does not chew its cud. So that's one of those wonderful lessons in consistency, that we need to be the same on the inside as we are on the outside. So that's just one more example of that. There are people who always love to give examples of, Jewish things, that why we can eat this food and not eat that food. There are those who talk about it's health reasons, right? Now, there are a few rabbis who've said that, but it's not about that at all. Again, it's about commandedness. If pork is cooked well, you shouldn't have a problem with trichinosis, right? Same problem, by the way, with eggs if you don't cook them well, despite the Rocky movies, where you would drink those raw eggs, right? If you don't prepare food well, that's what it's about. There are other important lessons. For example, one of the things, you're looking at a man, believe it or not, who has never touched, let alone consumed, a cheeseburger. I know it's un-American, but why not? Because we are forbidden to mix meat and milk. And in the Bible it says 3 times, Lo tzvashel gadi b'chalei, that you shall not seethe or cook a kid, a baby goat, in its mother's milk. Now think for a moment. Besides the fact that milk symbolizes life, and and meat symbolizes death more than anything else, right? Think about the grotesqueness, not of a cheeseburger. I have no problems with people who eat cheeseburgers, of literally cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Think about that. I mean, it's a combination of things that are totally contradictory. And the notion of cooking an animal in its own mother's milk that's supposed to sustain that animal is just offensive. Now the rabbis, whether you like it or not, expanded the laws. We have a faith that is rooted in tradition, but is interpreted over the centuries and over the millennia by rabbis, and they add all these different explanations to it. And so they, instead of just saying you can't just cook a kid in the mother's milk, they said, all right, that means now also you can't have meat and dairy together. And that also means that you can't, that you should have separate sets of dishes for your dairy food and for your meat food. So these are all, very clear examples of how rabbinic tradition added to the biblical laws. And in many ways, when you study Judaism, you realize that biblical laws were interpreted and reinterpreted. So, for example, another law that a lot of people are familiar with is the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wild and rebellious son. You all heard of him? What happened to him? What was supposed to happen to him in the Bible? You had to stone him. But the rabbis, it didn't sit well with the rabbis. So what they did was they created a Jewish law to make it so narrow and limited that the rabbis themselves conclude there never was and there never will be a child who will be executed by his parents. So it said in the text, the child who doesn't listen to his mother and does not listen to the voice of his mother and his father. So the rabbi said, in order to prosecute, the child's parents had to have identical voices, which meant not only that they had to agree in the child rearing of the child, but that their voices had to be indistinguishable from one another. That dad's voice had to be identical to mom's voice, and vice versa. And they said, you know, what did he have to do? He had to steal liquor between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half, and he had to be warned and all these things. So they basically took it out of existence. So again, please understand that if you're going to try to appreciate Jewish law, it is not simply a biblical tradition. It is a rabbinic tradition where so many of these things are developed. I'm coming pretty close to the end. I'll open to the questions. Thank you very much. There was a story that we Jews are in the year 5,776, right? And the Chinese year is somewhere in the 4,000s, which means that Jews were able to survive for over 1,000 years without Chinese food. And finally, to round this off, perhaps we will say that the most important lesson in Jewish dietary laws is that Jews are not allowed to eat pork products except in Chinese restaurants. That's done jokingly, but the truth is that most Jews, even though you were very clear in saying that most Eastern Indians will not eat beef, I would say that while it is prohibited for Jews, traditional Jews, or one could say all Jews, from eating pork products, that it's something that is violated by most Jews. The number of Jews who keep kosher are in a distinct minority. But I hope that some of the things that I shared with you will help you appreciate that Jewish traditions regarding what we eat are there to help develop our sense of following God's will and creating a sense of obligation and understanding that even if we have cravings for this, that, and something else, that God directs us in certain ways that are acceptable for us. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Lavinsky. And we're going to turn now to the Jain faith. Yes, we are. Mahendra Shah is a member of the board of Arizona Interfaith Movement, a very beloved member, and also an active member of the Jain Center of Greater Phoenix. He was born in India and educated here in the US, and he's lived in the Greater Phoenix area since 1981. And Mahendra was actively involved in the building of the Jain Center of Greater Phoenix. And he is a teacher of the Jain religion, and he actually teaches Sunday school students at the temple. He lives with his wife, Sandhya? Sandhya. Hello, Sandhya. And their son and daughter-in-law and two beautiful grandchildren. His interests include traveling, religious studies, and community faith, and community service. And Mahendra is going to share with us about the forbidden foods of the Jain faith and perhaps illuminate some of the questions we might have, particularly regarding root vegetables, right? Thank you so much, and please help me welcome Mahendra.
Thank you, Mitzi. Before I start, I don't think a lot of people have heard about Jain, so I'll a little bit give you a background about Jain so that you have a little basis for what I'm going to be talking about. Jains believe in purification of soul. Basically, the body is not that important, but the soul is important. And since the soul is residing in the body, you have to take care of the body in order to spiritually advance your soul. The basic philosophy of Jain is that every soul and this is very important, every soul is capable of becoming a god. In other words, even a small ant has a soul that is capable of becoming a god. And what is godhood? Godhood is nothing but karma-less soul. The soul is karma, and I'm sure that you must have heard the word karma. Karma is a very common word in a lot of Indian religion. Hinduism believes that, Buddhism believes in that, Jainism also does believe in that. A lot of other religions of India do believe in karma. So, the godhood in Jainism is nothing but a pure soul. And the pure soul will reside in, we call it moksha, or you have heard the word nirvana, or somebody would say that it is karma-less soul. Okay, that is nothing but the godhood. So what I was saying is that every little creatures do have a soul. And that soul is same as yours and mine. So once you look it up from that perspective, you have a respect, not from the body standpoint, but from the soul standpoint, saying that all the living creatures are same as my soul. So if I don't like, golden rule again, if I don't like anybody to hurt my soul, why would I hurt any other souls? Another thing which is the key thing in Jainism is there are 5 senses, and each one of the creature, or each one who has a body and a soul, has 1 to 5 senses. What are those senses? Touch, taste, smell, see, and hear. Those are the 5 senses. Now the human being is supreme among all the all the living beings, because from the human being you can achieve the godhood. From other areas you have to come to the human being sense and then achieve the godhood. So in other words, in short, this is what the Jainism stands for. There are a lot of other things that like Jainism do preach and all. So now if you go back to this, if everyone has a soul, then you got to realize that you are doing a hurt or killing, or you are eating a soul from that perspective, from Jainism perspective again. I'm coming from the Jainism perspective. So no matter what it is, you're not going to eat meat because you are killing a 5 sense a living being, whether it's a chicken or a cow or a pig or whatever it is. It's a killing a 5 sense human being. And with having a 5 sense, you always have a feeling, plus you have in your mind, when you see them being slaughtered and all, you will see that they go through the suffering. And that suffering is because of you. That's what the Jain believes. Now, how many different ways you can do the karmas? There are 9 different ways that you can do the karmas. They are divided into a section of 3 and 3. What are first 3? The first 3 is Man, Vachan and Kaya. Now this is, I'm talking from Shastra, or our religious, one of the Granth, which is called the Tva Sutra. So these are the things coming from that, okay? Basically 3 ways you can do that. Man, Vachan and Kaya. Man is mind, Vachan is speaking, and Kaya is physically doing that. Those are the 3, one category, one section of that. The other thing is, whether you do it, you tell someone else to do it, or you encourage the third person to get it done what you want to do it and achieve the results that you want. But any one of these 9 ways, 3 times 3 is 9, any one of these 9 ways, if you do it, you do get karma. Jain always believes in individuality. So it says that it doesn't matter what other people are doing it. It is up to you. You have a choice to act in a way that you want to act so that you don't get the karma. I'm not going to get any karma from Anne. I'm going to get it what I do. Okay, so that is karma. That is a distinct principle of that. So with this background, basically you see that the Jains will not eat meat at all. Because any one of the animals that you're going to kill, it has got 5 senses, it's got a mind, it's got to understand, it's got a life, and it's got a soul. Okay. Second thing Jains do not eat is a lot of and Mitzi mentioned about the root vegetables, and I'll go a little bit into root vegetable, is root vegetables. Why we don't eat root vegetables? Because the root vegetables, you pull the whole plant out of the soil. You don't take, if you have a hunger and if you want to take a little apple or something like whatever grows on the tree, like beans and things like that, the beans you only harvest it when it is already done with it. Its life is pretty much over, it's dry. You bring it down and eat it. So it's a less harm. Another one principle that Jains do believe is like killing, living is killing, but the best living is the least killing. So the less amount of killing or less amount of harm that you do, the better it is for you. Again, it is all individual thing. So you want to purify your soul, your goal being ultimate, achieve the moksha, then you want to purify your soul. So the less killing is much better. When you pull up the whole plant, you are also hurting the surrounding little insects and little bacteria and all those things from their habitat, from their own living space, and you're pulling it out. So you're making them dead, and that is your karma. So with all this principle, Jains do have a lot of restrictions of eating a lot of foods, okay? They don't eat honey. Why they don't eat honey? Because honey, you have to really warm it up and you have to burn this place, and there are a lot of little eggs and insects and bees that you will kill to have the honey come out. They don't eat some of the fruits which are like we don't eat is a fig. Figs are a lot of seeds, and each seed is capable of, if you put it in there, it grows and it has a life. So basically, you don't eat the fig, and if you ever seen the fig, if it fallen down and if you open it up, you will see small little bugs after very short amount of time. There are a lot of other things that Anita mentioned does belong to Jain also. It's called sattvic food, tamasic food. So that's why she mentioned about the tamasic food being one of the root vegetables, or a couple of root vegetables like onions, garlic are considered to be tamasic. It makes you body-wise also. Anita mentioned that. So I'm not going to repeat that. But that Hinduism principle of sattvic food and tamasic food and other food which are good for your body also apply to Jainism.
1 minute.
1 minute? Okay. Then what I was going to say is there's a lot of Jains do restrict also intake of food. In other words, basically you want to nourish your body so that you can do spiritual advancement and you can concentrate on soul. That is the idea, right? So they do take as much as you need. Don't waste food, one thing. That's the principle is that you're not going to waste food. And you take as much as you need. As a matter of fact, they go a little bit beyond by saying that you don't fill your stomach up to the top or up to the neck like people will normally say, oh, I like this thing, so I'm going to eat that. They say, don't do that because that makes you lethargic. Your time is going to go in something else. You might as well as use that time for doing, like your spiritual advancement. Second thing also they do is, so basically what I was saying is that rather than eating up to the neck kind of things, you eat less than. They say normally 2 to 3 bites less than what your actual need is, or you feel your tummy is going to get full. So you eat less. There are a lot of things we've done is fasting. We do the fasting, and our fasting is a very rigorous fasting, and rigorous fasting being you are not going to eat any kind of food. If you have done a full fast, you're not going to eat any kind of food. Only thing you're going to drink is water. So water is only allowed, and that is too, water you don't take it after sunset. So you're going to eat only whatever you can do after the sunrise and the sunset, between that time. So there are a lot of other restrictions. Another things we also do is every fortnight there are 2 days, minimum 2 days that people will do fast. It's on the 8th day of the first 15 days and the 14th day. So it's the same, we have a calendar, 30 days divided into Sud and Wad. So it's a half 15, first 15 days are called Sud, another one is called Wad. And in those 15 days, 8th and 14th day, you will do the fasting. Now, again, just summarize this, a lot of Jains you will see here do eat root vegetables. It's not, it's forbidden, but you will see the exceptions that the people will, eat the root vegetables. I'm pretty much done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mahendra, for sharing that. That was very interesting, and I know that we probably would love to have you speak more for everyone, to speak for like an hour at least. And then we'd have to have some wonderful samplings of all of these delicious foods, and maybe we'll have to do that at a conference or something in the future, because that would be delicious, nutritious, and informational. And who doesn't love to get together and eat and try out different foods, right?
Sure.
So next we're going to go to David DeLozier. He is an Essene. He is another beloved Arizona Interfaith Movement board member. He's also a board member of Heaven on Earth Creations, founder of Phoenix Vegan Spirituality, and the founder of United Teams for Restorative Justice. David's been a lawyer for over 40 years with a background in a variety of litigation, and his law firm uses the motto of living the golden rule. David's provided volunteer representation for many nonprofit organizations, especially those in restorative justice, and he has numerous degrees, including a Master of Arts from Columbia University and Doctor of Jurisprudence from University of Tennessee. He's a member of the State Bar of Arizona, United States District Court, District of Arizona, United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and has practiced law extensively in most of the courts of Arizona. In reading through your bio, it didn't seem like there was a court you hadn't practiced in Arizona. He was raised as a Southern Baptist. However, currently, the religious tradition closest to his beliefs and heart that embodies peace and compassion for all living beings is that of the Essene faith tradition. He believes in one God as creator of the universe, a God of love, that there is no hell, and that heaven has many mansions with room for all faith traditions. He believes in reincarnation, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience to learn and develop awareness of the oneness of all humans. David's been married to Amy, right there. Hello, Amy! For 37 years. They have 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren, and have been residents of Arizona for the entire time of their marriage. So please help me welcome David DeLozier.
Thank you, Mitzi, and I also want to thank Larry Bell and the Jewish Historical Society for making this space available to us. And of course, the Arizona Interfaith Movement, and Ann for doing all the things she does. Mine is a personal journey. I'm not proselytizing for anything, okay? I'm not trying to convince anybody that I'm right and you're wrong, okay? I hope that's how all of us feel. I believe it is. But I had heard the word Essene, for example, several years ago. But I had adopted some of the Jain principles without even knowing what Jainism was. I respect all life forms. I won't step on an ant unless it's done unintentionally, for example. My bees, I love them. My flowers, I love them, and be able to send those bees and other animals to meet their environments. So part of who I am was long before I learned about the Essenes. But being a Southern Baptist, and for many, many years, I went to an undergraduate Southern Baptist school. My father was a Baptist minister for 50 years. Tradition, okay, it was ingrained in me that you were going to hell every Sunday if you didn't get baptized and so forth, and you didn't do this and you didn't do that. It was all ritualistic, in other words. And I wanted a personal relationship with some creator, okay? So I started studying Jain, studied this, studied Seventh-day Adventist, studied a number of the religions in India, and I studied Buddhism and so forth and so on. And I chose the Essene formula form. Some of you, like he mentioned, that the Jains may not know who the Essenes were. Well, number one, they were Jewish. So you start off with that. Some people say that they dated back to the time of Enoch. They may have been before that, but that's part of history. The things that I've studied now are by translations done by a guy named Edward, I can't pronounce his last name, Sekely, Seleki. But he studied in, his work was based on Joseph Flavius, Philo, Paulinus, and manuscripts in the Library of the Vatican, the Library of Habsburgs in Vienna, and the Library of the British Museum, and of course the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found at Qumran. The Essene traditions represent a synthesis, in my opinion, of the great traditions and contributions to humanity from different cultures of antiquity. In Palestine and Syria, they were known as the Essenes, for example. In Egypt, they were known as Therapeutae. Both of them means healers. One of the things that always bothered me is that in the New Testament, it said Jesus is quoted as saying, "These things shall you do, and greater things shall you do than I did." Well, I was taught that the last of the healers died with the last of the apostles, so therefore there was no healing anymore. So that's why we've got the hospitals full of sick people. Okay? It's our fault, in other words. It's not our fault. It went away. History of Essenes, however, is clouded. Some writers say they, like I said, they date back to the time of Enoch. There were some books that even use that terminology of their titles. If anybody's interested, here are some of the things that I've studied over the years. Similarities, however, can be found in the teaching of Zoroaster, also in Brahmanism, the Vedas, the Uplandish. The yoga systems in India spring from the same source, from what I read. Buddha later gave forth essentially the same basic ideas, and his sacred Bodhi tree is correlated with the Essene tree of life. The Tibetan, in Tibet, teaching once more found expression in the Tibetan wheel of life. The Pythagoreans and the Stoics in ancient Greece also followed the Essene principles. The same teachings was an element in the Adonite culture of the Phoenicians and of the Alexandrian school of philosophy in Egypt. They were said to be heirs of the Chaldean and the Persian astronomy and the Egyptian arts of healing. From at least 200 years before Jesus' time and until the time of Jesus, the Essenes lived in this particular group, lived on the shores of the lakes and rivers and away from cities and towns. And they practiced a communal way of life, sharing equally in everything. They were mainly agriculturalists and arboriculturists. Sorry, I'm in trouble with that word. Arboriculturists. They had a vast knowledge of crops, soil, and climatic conditions, and enabled them to grow a variety of fruits and vegetables in comparatively desert areas and within a minimum of labor, which is really fascinating. They could work for an hour or two, and it'd be the equivalent of working 8 hours for most people. How they accomplished that, I've not figured out yet. The evening and the beginning of their day and their Sabbath or holy day began on Friday, okay? And it was the first day of the week. Their way of life enabled them to live to a vast age of 120 years and more. I don't know about you, that's one of the things I was looking for, okay? How do you get to be what the Bible says is our appointed out days, 120 years, okay? Well, I was looking for that, so that's why I gravitated toward this. They also are attributed to marvelous strength and endurance. They also sent out healers and teachers such as Elijah, John the Baptist, John the Beloved, and the great, whom most people call, that have studied this area, the great Essene Master Jesus, who was also known as something very interesting, the Prince of Peace. Okay, and that I think is what most of us seek for this world, is peace. The Essenes also were known as peacemakers, and some of their writings include the Gospel of Peace. So, needless to say, it resonated a great deal with me. Hymns was one of my favorite words, okay, for example. They also had no servants, which I don't know if for you, But for me, that's always been an anomaly that I never could figure out how you could have anybody that was a slave to you is beyond comprehension. But we've had that blight in this country and other countries throughout, and it's still going on apparently in some parts of the world. But they were one of the first people, apparently one of the first people to condemn slavery both in theory and in practice. In other words, you've got two aspects of it there. Forbidden foods. Well, it's easy in the Essene culture. There are no foods that come from any animal that is permitted. Okay, so you have no milk, no cheese, no curds, no beef, no pork, the whole list. Anything that's alive, you don't eat it, period. Okay, and frankly, on a personal note, when I found that this was where I was headed, I weighed 225 pounds, had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, you name it, it was wrong for me. I was on my deathbed, basically. Probably wouldn't be here today had it not been for that. So today I'm vegan, which to me means, again, no animal products. But that was my personal journey. I changed my diet from standard American diet that I had lived on for 65 years and had gotten myself in a great deal of harm, okay, and adopted that lifestyle. Today I'm 165 and have none of those issues. So for me, it's both a spiritual and a health journey. But that's what I adopted for me. Doesn't mean it's good for you, good for you, good for you. I'm not going to throw any rocks at you for having your cheeseburger. It's your choice.
Or not.
Or not, okay?
Yeah.
As far as hunger in the world, as far as hunger in the world, the experts that I've read say that there could be no hunger, no person going hungry today if we didn't feed all the grain that we do to the animals. We're killing 619,000 animals a week to just satisfy our palates. So you make a choice, and if the choice is life, you don't do those things. But that's, again, my personal journey. As far as fasting, again, it's a spiritual purpose fasting. You enter into a fast with, I need to have understanding about this area of my life. What can come to me from whatever source that might give me guidance. I had a lawyer one time who was cross-examining me, of all things, and he said, well, how long does the fast last? Until you don't stop, until you stop. Okay, that you don't have a timetable on it. It's not 1 day, it's not 1 week, it's not 1 month, it's not 1 year, if that's what it takes. But all you consume during that fasting period is water. Okay, so there's a lot of similarities, and I think that's one of the things I like about it. I think that's, by the way, one final point. For me, it includes clothing. I don't wear any wool, I don't wear any silk, I don't wear any leather, etc., etc. So I had to give away a lot of my clothing, okay, to charities and other places. But I now have been able to master that. And the hardest thing is belts, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for really enlightening us on the Essene faith tradition and also for touching on the sustainability aspect, which was one of the questions that I had asked for our panelists to share today. So we're going to go back this way now to the beautiful Azra Hussain, who is the president, founder, and director of the Islamic Speakers Bureau, an apolitical nonprofit educational organization founded in 1999, providing education about Islam and Muslim culture. In her role as director for the ISBA, she trains speakers for the Bureau and plans and facilitates educational and interfaith events. Azra is also a speaker with the ISBA. She speaks mainly on beliefs and practices in Islam and gender roles. She's spoken at numerous schools, colleges, churches, and other public institutions, as well as civic groups. In fact, Azra is involved and very, very active in our community, in our greater Phoenix community, the Scottsdale community. You know, we're very blessed to have her here today because she is a busy woman traveling all over the world speaking, actually. She's also provided cultural sensitivity training to police departments, hospital personnel, and corporations. She was born and brought up in Kuwait and has been in Arizona since 1981, living in Scottsdale with her husband and 4 children. Azra volunteers with many organizations, and some of them are the Interfaith Alliance of Fountain Hills Steering Committee, the Interfaith Network of Scottsdale Steering Committee, ditto, twice, right? The Steering Committee for Salam, Chai, Paradise, Advisory Council for the Islamic Center of the Northeast Valley. And Azra also is active in an event that is going to take place this coming Sunday, and that is the Interfaith Thanksgiving event, which I just want to give a plug for right now, because I'll probably forget if I leave it till later. But in Fountain Hills, David Belton, who's a United Methodist minister, just has an amazing interfaith heart, has put on for many years now the Interfaith Thanksgiving, which Azra and I have been blessed to be part of. And so I invite you to find out more information from us about that, because it's something dear to Arizona Interfaith's heart, and we'd love to have you come and support that. But anyways, I digress. Let us welcome the lovely Azra Hussain, who will share with us now.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I think she kept adding stuff in that wasn't written down. That was very sweet. Well, I'm going to get straight into this forbidden food stuff, because as you can imagine, and I think very close to kosher laws as well, there's a lot of nitty-gritty that goes into Islamic dietary laws. First and foremost, Muslims reach for their dietary laws and get them from 2 main sources. One would be the Quran, which is the Muslim holy scripture, which Muslims believe is divinely revealed. And also, secondly, from the Hadith, which the word itself is an Arabic word, means report or narrative. And basically, it's a record of the prophetic tradition of his sayings and his practices of the Prophet Muhammad. So that's basically where we're going to get our sources of dietary, or any laws actually. And then beyond that, there will be interpretations and explanations given by scholars on topics that might be not clear in the other 2 sources. Now, terminology that I do want to explain to you before I move further is you'll hear this a lot. Words like halal and haram and dhabiha. So I'll tell you what each one of these means. Halal means lawful or permissible. Haram, again, is the opposite, which would be forbidden or unlawful. Dhabiha or zabiha is, it's slaughtered a specific way that's required, where one is gentle and kind to the animal and actually asks the animal's permission before doing so. In a humane way, one moves the animal away from all the other animals so the other animals don't get frightened. One is supposed to give water to the animal so that it's not thirsty before one slaughters it. And it's done where the veins are cut in the neck and the blood is drained out almost instantly. I mean, not quite instantly, but very fast, so the body is free of blood when we go to it. And again, because it's considered the disease is carried in the blood. So now, that's called zabiha or dhabiha. Now, people nowadays tend to use the word zabiha and halal almost interchangeably, which is not quite accurate, but for people nowadays it tends to be. And then there's one last word, which is mashbuh, which means questionable or doubtful. So if one feels that one's not sure about the content of certain foods, and the source of, say, the oil or whatever is questionable as to whether it came from animal or it came from vegetable, then it's better to avoid something that's doubtful than to continue having it. So that's something to do with terminology. Now, in terms of an overview, I'm going to talk to these in terms of, say, non-animal based. For Muslims, anything impure or harmful is haram, basically forbidden, such as poison. Not allowed to poison yourself, knowingly. Recreational drugs are forbidden. anything in any form other than for the sake of medicine to heal oneself. So anything where you're going to harm your body is considered absolutely forbidden. In terms of drinks, Muslims are not allowed to drink alcoholic drinks. You will now hear, from Muslims, I'm telling you what the laws are. It doesn't mean that Muslims necessarily practice it that certain way. According to the Quran, even if it's a small amount, alcohol is forbidden. Then we'll go to animal-based foods. For Muslims, all seafood is allowed, it's permissible. In terms of mammals and birds, all carnivores are forbidden, such as vultures. Also, this sounds very odd, but donkeys and mules are forbidden, because those are beasts of burden. They've been given to us to help us with our work. Crow is also forbidden. And then anything we're supposed to kill, so things that would give us diseases, so mice and scorpions, forbidden. And then anything we're not allowed to kill. Muslims aren't allowed to kill frogs, so we're not allowed to eat them, which I just learned by myself, by the way. I did not know that before now. Also, any halal animal that has not been slaughtered properly. Now, for Muslims, halal is something that's permissible, right? Even if it's a permissible animal to eat, if it has not been slaughtered in the correct manner. For example, somebody might just strangle an animal, not acceptable. They might strike it with a blunt object, not acceptable. Shooting, not acceptable. Dropping it from a high place. All of those are unacceptable ways of killing an animal to eat. And then lastly, an animal that has been slaughtered in the name of a god other than God, of an entity other than the one creator, the God of Abraham or the God of creation. Now, in terms of what Muslims are supposed to avoid, the Quran is very specific on the topics, the specific things. Basically, no flesh of swine, so no part of a pig, basically. No blood. And people go, what do you mean? Nobody eats blood. Yes, they do. There are parts of the world where blood sausage is a specialty, is a delicacy. Blood pudding is well known as well in certain parts of the world. So Muslims are not allowed to have that. Muslims are also not allowed to eat carrion. Basically, an animal that was already dead when we got there, not allowed to have that because you don't know how it died. So that's not necessarily healthy. So those are some of the restrictions that Muslims have. Also, there are rules for Muslims. We've been told in the Quran that God has made lawful and permissible for us all of the food in the world, except these few that I just mentioned. So what God has made lawful for us, we as human beings are not allowed to make unlawful. So if He's permitted us to have it, we cannot create rules to make it unlawful, because then we're assuming to know more than God. Muslims are not allowed to waste, and not just waste in terms of growing excess and throwing it away, or buying excess and throwing it away, but eating excess. So that's also a waste. You're destroying your body. You're ruining something that should be a well-oiled machine that functions in a very wonderful way if you treat it right. Muslims are asked to fast at least a minimum for the month of Ramadan, for 29 to 30 days of the 9th month of the Muslim calendar, where the way Muslims fast is they will not eat or drink anything from before sunrise to after sunset every single day for that whole month. Thank you. And then, and the reason for that kind of fasting are many. but some of them would be to feel compassion for those who don't have as much as we do, to appreciate what we have, to build willpower. And today people will tell you that that kind of fasting also flushes out toxins that we've been building up in our body throughout the year. Sharing food with others is considered a blessing and a blessed action. So even in the actions of the Prophet Muhammad, if he had a half a piece of bread and somebody came in the door, he would make sure he broke that in half and shared that with others. So that is an example that we're supposed to follow, always share our food with others. And in all of the rules that I've given you, in extreme conditions, under duress, Muslims can break any of their dietary rules. For example, if I'm out on Everest, this is not going to happen, by the way. If I'm out climbing Mount Everest, you need to have me committed. But if that should happen, and I am stuck on a mountain, and I'm freezing to death, and somebody who comes to save me gives me brandy to warm me up, perfectly acceptable. Save the person first, then you can worry about all the dietary laws. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Azra. Very enlightening. And so our final speaker today is, we're so excited to have you here, Pastor Gary, because Pastor Gary, this is his first time at Arizona Interfaith, I believe, and at one of our faith forums. And we just get really excited when we have a panelist who really doesn't know a lot about Arizona Interfaith, because we think it's a wonderful opportunity to share. So we're so blessed to have Pastor Gary Venden, who's been a pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church since 1979. And he has spent the last 18 years at the Glendale Adventist Church in Northwest Phoenix. He's been married to his wife Marilyn for 36 years. And Gary and Marilyn are lifelong vegetarians. Gary is a musician playing the piano and guitar, mainly as an accompanist for his wife Marilyn's amazing voice. Oh, so we can have Marilyn come sing at the dinner event that we're going to have. Wonderful, and Gary can play the piano and guitar. They've recorded 7 music albums over the span of their marriage and ministry, and lead worship each Sabbath at their church. And you worship on Saturday, is that correct? Yes. We love Ray Navarro, who's a board member of the Arizona Interfaith Movement.
He was my associate.
Oh, well, we just adore him. We were in celebration with him on Sunday. So, for Paul's retirement. Gary just turned 60. Oh my goodness, so you're sharing that with all of us. Wonderful. He enjoys tackling a major mountain peak every August and is training to run a marathon in February. Please help me welcome Pastor Gary Venden.
Thank you very much. Seventh-day Adventists believe, teach, and practice the clean and unclean meat laws of Torah, as found in Leviticus 11 and 14. We're probably one of the very few evangelical Christian groups who see light in that. And it's based on our belief in the absolute continuity of Old and New Testaments. So let me try to explain that briefly. We believe that the Israel of the Old Testament was more about a faith line than a bloodline. Abraham was a Babylonian who believed. He was called to become a nation demonstrating to the world what life is like lived God's way. Non-Israelites could join the faith. Israelites could be cut off for apostasy. So we see a faith line more than a bloodline. Secondly, we believe the Old Testament teaches grace as much as the New Testament. Through the sanctuary temple services and sacrifices, the sacrifices were not about what we bring to God, but our recognition of what He brings to us through Messiah. We believe the Old Testament teaches we're saved by faith in the Messiah to come, just as the New Testament teaches we're saved by grace through faith in the Messiah who came. So based on this continuity concept, we have no denigration or dismissal or leaving behind of the Old Testament as does much of evangelical Christianity. We see no difficulty with law and grace. Grace is how we're saved from sin and death. God's laws simply describe how life works now that we're saved. Once you're rescued from sin and death, the Torah describes the life that's possible through the indwelling, restoring power of God. Deuteronomy 32, Moses final words, be careful to observe all the words of this Torah. They're not trivial to you because they're your life to prolong your days. Now, we tend to divide the laws of Torah, what we would say logically, into several groups. Ceremonial laws that look forward to the coming of Messiah, that naturally passed into obsolescence when we believe Jesus the Messiah came. So we don't sacrifice, because sacrificing would be saying we're still looking for Messiah. We believe the moral laws are timeless, they do not change. We believe certain civil and statutes and penalties, especially relating to moral laws, were applied when God was king, but they're left now in the hands of civil government, just as I find Jesus and Paul both applying moral rules from the Old Testament without mandating the penalties. We also believe that there are health laws that have nothing to do so much with ceremony as with health and hygiene. God describing how to best care for our bodies. He made us, He owns us, He knows how to operate us best. And so we take the health and hygienic laws as not optional. We should be equal or above those. I believe that God assigned human and animal diet at creation. I accept the literal interpretation of Genesis 1-3. Before sin, in chapter 1, verse 29, God said that we were to eat, humans were to eat the seeds from the plants and the fruit from the trees, which would mean basically grains, nuts, and fruits, which would agree with Jain in terms of not pulling up the plant. But then after sin, in chapter 3, verse 18, green plants were added. And I always try to figure out why. I would say probably due to the decay on the food supply. Delicate fruits, they are most susceptible to spoilage and weather change, then roots and vegetables. And after sin, you have the entrance of spoilage. So it seems that God broadened the food supply a little bit. Then after the flood, which I believe is God's merciful rescue mission to save humanity from the imminent self-destruction, the world looked kind of like the Hussain river bottom after a flash flood. And it would take several seasons in order for plant life to adequately reestablish the food supply. So, going into the ark, God asked Noah to take 7 pairs, I believe it is, of clean animals, and only 1 pair of unclean, to be used, I believe, after the flood for sacrifice and food. Obviously, eating or sacrificing an unclean animal shortly after the flood would have ended the species. Genesis 9:3 says something interesting, because we as Seventh-day Adventists discuss with other evangelical Christian traditions who think you can eat anything that moves. Genesis 9 verse 3 says, every living thing that moves shall be food for you. But I have a practical approach to Scripture which says if they had taken that to mean the unclean, they would have ended species. So logically, it has to mean the clean animals. Though God did not explain or describe clean and unclean until Mount Sinai in the Torah, I believe the ancients were smarter than us and not cavemen. They passed things, knowledge down mind to mind, and it would make no sense for God to tell Noah to take 7 clean into the ark if he didn't know what they were. So I believe by practical, that was pre-known before the Torah was written. As far as the rules in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, divided hoof, chew the cud, both, not one or the other. The fish, fins and scales, not one or the other. And not eating the carrion birds. I find it interesting. You can't eat grasshoppers and locusts. And something I've never done. But I appreciated the rabbi saying that God said it, that's enough. I always try to figure out why, and I find it interesting. He basically says eat a vegetarian. If you're going to eat meat, and you eat that which divides the hoof and chews the cud, and has fins and scales, you're essentially eating the animals that don't eat animals. Because now we know that to eat the animal that ate the animal that ate the animal that ate the roadkill, you're eating the roadkill. And so I think, I look at these from a health standpoint. I find it interesting that right after the flood, according to the biblical account in the 11th chapter of Genesis, in 10 generations, the lifespan went from 900 years to 175. And the next 3 to Joseph, it went down to 110, and by the time you get to David, we're at 70. Can't prove it, but I see a correlation between the the adding of meat to the diet, and the shortening of our lives. Because we know now that lives are being lengthened by getting back to a plant-based diet. So as a doctrinal, Paul in the New Testament says our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. We're not our own. We're bought with a price. Glorify God with our bodies. For this reason, we believe it's important how we take care of our bodies. Seventh-day Adventists have a monistic, not a dualistic view of the human body. We believe we are a breathing body is a soul. We don't have a soul. We are a soul. We believe that's the Old Testament basic teaching. And therefore, taking care of the body is part of taking care of the whole thing. You don't separate it out. So with those doctrinal beliefs, we teach and hold that the unclean foods in Torah are non-optional loving commands by our Creator. As a practical health benefit, as Seventh-day Adventists, we've also promoted a vegetarian diet for more than the past 100 years, as well as alcohol and tobacco-free. Notice I said promote a vegetarian diet. Doctrinal, clean and unclean foods. The other, a benefit. We believe the original diet had to be vegetarian because there was no death before sin. We believe the ultimate diet in Paradise Restored will be vegetarian because there will be no death. Therefore, we believe that also the clear evidence of a plant-based diet on human health is optimum. God knows what he's talking about. His ways are life.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Gary. Wow, what an amazing panel. Are you glad you came today? Did you learn a lot? It's like, I can't wait to see the videos now because there's so much information and everyone gave just amazing snippets and scriptural references, and how much can we learn by viewing these videos again. So we have a brief, very brief period